Rain hammered against the glass roof of the greenhouse, drowning out the silence of our Thanksgiving dinner. My father, Robert, raised his wine glass, the condensation dripping onto his hand. To Ashley he beamed, gesturing to my sister. For her call back, a true star in the making. I set down my fork, the metal clicking against the china. I just secured the municipal contract, Dad. It saves the nursery $25,000 this quarter. He didn't blink. He looked me dead in the eye. His expression flat and dismissive. Emily, you were born to tend the soil so Ashley can bloom. That's the natural order. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, unclipped the heavy master ring of keys from my belt, the keys to the delivery trucks, the inventory lockers, the safe, and dropped them with a wet thud directly into the bowl of hot mashed potatoes. Then the soil is on its own, I said. I walked out into the freezing Portland rain and left the greenhouse door wide open behind me. Before I tell you what I did, next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The cold November rain soaked through my coat, but I didn't feel it. Or rather, I chose not to acknowledge it. I walked to my car with a steady, measured pace. I didn't run. Running would imply panic, and I wasn't panicking. I was calculating. Behind me, the greenhouse door stood agape, a black rectangle against the glowing glass. I knew the physics of what was happening inside. The temperature would drop 3 degrees every 10 minutes. The draft would hit the prize Carter orchids first. They were sensitive, high maintenance, and worth $400 a stem. By the time my father realized the thermal seal was broken, the damage would be irreversible. Cellular rupture from the cold, a complete inventory loss. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine hummed a reliable mechanical sound that grounded me. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't check my phone to see if they were calling. I just put the car in gear and drove. The windshield wipers sliced back and forth a metronome, counting down the seconds of my former life. I thought I would feel fear, the old familiar terror of disappointing Robert and Susan, but there was only a hollow silence where the anxiety used to be. It was like a fever breaking. The heat was gone, leaving only clarity. I drove 40 minutes to my studio apartment on the east side. It wasn't much. 400 square ft of repurposed industrial space, but I paid for every inch of it with money I earned from designs they never saw. When I unlocked the door, the air inside was still and cool. It smelled of potting soil and lemon oil. My plants, my real plants, were thriving here. Monas climbing the brick walls, ferns cascading from the shelves. They didn't need me to bleed for them. They just needed water and light. I took off my wet coat and hung it by the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, twice, a barrage. I took it out and looked at the screen. Robert, Ashley, Susan. Robert again. I didn't read the messages. I didn't answer. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop and logged into the bank portal. My movements were precise, almost robotic. I navigated to the standing transfer order. $2,800 scheduled for the first of the month. Rent for their apartment. I clicked cancel. A confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? I didn't hesitate. Then I opened the business license registry. I'd started the paperwork to remove myself as the registered agent. Months ago, a fail-safe had been too cowardly to execute. I finished the form, signed it digitally, and hit submit. The screen flashed, processing. It wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I was closing the ledger on a bad investment. I sat back in my chair and listened to the rain against my own window. For 29 years, I had been the structural support beam for a crumbling building. Tonight, I'd walked away and I was just going to let gravity do the rest. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the leaves of my monstera. The silence was heavy, but for the first time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like a clean slate. I closed my eyes and let the memories come, not to hurt myself but to witness the evidence. I needed to see the architecture of my own eraser. It started when I was 12. I remembered the weight of the fertilizer bags, 50 lb of nitrogen and bone meal digging into my shoulders. I was hauling them from the delivery truck to the storage shed in the mud. My father, Robert, watched from the porch, sipping iced tea. Good for your character, Emily, he'd said. Builds grit. Meanwhile, inside the climate-controlled sunroom, my sister Ashley was taking private posture lessons. We have to protect her potential. That was the dynamic. I was the mule. Ashley was the show pony. I was built for labor. She was built for display. For years, I told myself they just didn't understand business. Green Leaf Gardens was a high-end boutique, a lifestyle brand before the term existed, but the math never worked. They bought imported Italian terracotta pots that sat unsold for years. They leased delivery vans they didn't need. They hired consultants to rebrand the logo 3 times in a decade. The red ink was a river and I was the dam. I took over the payroll when I was 19 because the IRS threatened a lien. I restructured the inventory systems during my college breaks. And for the last 5 years, I had been the silent partner who kept the lights on. They lived in a luxury apartment downtown, 2 bedrooms, Riverview, $2,800 a month. They told their friends it was a savvy downsize. They didn't tell anyone that I paid the rent every single month. My salary as a landscape architect didn't go to vacations or designer clothes. It went to maintaining the illusion of their success. I used to think it was just bad luck or incompetence. I used to think if I just worked harder, if I fixed one more crisis, they would finally see me. But sitting there in the dark, the truth finally clicked into place. It wasn't an accident, it was a system. I'd read about it in psychology journals during sleepless nights. The narcissistic family system. It requires 2 distinct roles to function. The golden child who was the projection of the parent's ego, their vanity, their desire to be envied. She wasn't a person to them. She was a mirror reflecting how special they wanted to be. And then there is the scapegoat, the container for their shame, their laziness, their failures. That was me. They didn't hate me. They projected their incompetence onto me so they could feel superior while simultaneously relying on my competence to survive. They crippled Ashley by doing everything for her, ensuring she would never leave them. And they burdened me by making me do everything for them, ensuring I would never feel free enough to leave. It was a perfect parasitic machine, but tonight the machine was broken. I had removed the gear that turned the wheel. I looked at my hands calloused from years of handling soil and stone. They were strong hands, they were capable hands, and for the first time in 29 years they were empty of everyone else's baggage. 2 days later the withering began. I knew it would happen. I had designed the automated irrigation system for green leaf gardens myself. It was a complex network of solenoids, pressure regulators, and moisture sensors that required daily calibration. Without adjustments, the calcium in the hard water would clog the misting nozzles within 48 hours. The tropicals, the Callias, the alocasias would be the first to suffer. Their leaves would curl, turning brown at the edges as they suffocated in the dry, heated air. I was at my desk in the studio sketching a concept for a xeriscape project in the high desert when my phone screen lit up. It had been quiet for almost 24 hours, a tense ceasefire, while they likely scrambled to figure out why the rent check hadn't cleared. But now the panic had set in. A text from Robert popped up. No greeting, no question, just a demand. The misting system in Zone 4 is down. The orchids are dropping buds. Get over here and fix the valves now. I stared at the message. The entitlement was breathtaking. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply assumed that my labor was a utility he could switch back on like electricity or water. He assumed that even in Excel I was still his mechanic. I didn't reply. I took a sip of my coffee and continued sketching. 10 minutes later another text, this time a photo. It was a close-up of a prize Vanda orchid, its vibrant purple petals limp and shriveled. Look what you're doing, he wrote. You're destroying the inventory. This is thousands of dollars. Stop this tantrum and do your job, my job. He still thought it was my job. He still thought he was my employer, my master. He didn't realize that I had fired him. Then came Ashley. Her messages were a frantic stream of consciousness devoid of any awareness of anyone else's reality. Emily, seriously. Mom is crying in the kitchen because Dad is yelling about valves. I have my call back for the agency in 3 hours. 3 hours, I cannot deal with this negative energy right now. My skin is going to break out. You need to come fix this so I can focus. I read it twice so I can focus. Even as their business crumbled around them, the priority remained the same. Ashley's comfort, Ashley's potential, Ashley's skin. The plants were dying, their livelihood was evaporating, and her only concern was that the noise of the collapse was distracting her from her audition. It was a perfect microcosm of our entire lives. I was the one holding the umbrella, keeping the rain off them, and they were annoyed that my arm was shaking. I felt a ghost of the old guilt, a reflex trained into me over 2 decades. I knew exactly which valve was stuck. I knew I could drive over there, bypass the solenoid with a wrench and save the crop in 20 minutes. I could stop the shouting. I could smooth the waters. But then I looked at my own plants in the corner of my apartment. Green, lush, thriving in the light I provided. They were healthy because I tended to them. The nursery was dying because the people who owned it didn't know how to care for living things. They only knew how to harvest them. I didn't block their numbers yet. I wanted the record. I wanted the evidence of their priorities. I took a screenshot of the texts, Robert's command, Ashley's complaint, and saved them to a folder on my laptop labeled The End. I watched the phone buzz again. Robert was calling. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I imagined him standing in the humid, failing greenhouse, red-faced and sweating, surrounded by dying flowers, realizing for the first time that his shouting couldn't make the water flow. He was a king in a castle made of sugar, and it was starting to rain. I turned my phone face down. The silence returned heavy and sweet. Let them wither. It was the only way they would learn that I was the water. The next morning I traded my drafting pencil for a pen. I went to the downtown branch of my bank, the one with the marble floors and the vault that looked like it could survive a nuclear strike. I needed that kind of solidity. I sat across from a loan officer. I knew a woman named Sarah who had helped me with my own mortgage. I need to close the joint emergency fund, I told her. And I need to revoke all third-party authorization on my primary accounts today, right now. Sarah typed for a moment, her face neutral, but I saw the flicker of pity in her eyes. She saw the transfers, she saw the financial hemorrhage I had been stemming for years. Done, she said, sliding a paper across the desk. You're the only authorized signer as of 9002A. I signed the paper. The ink looked black and permanent. It felt like signing a death certificate, not for a person but for a role. The beautiful daughter was dead. The financier was dead. All that was left was Emily. From the bank, I drove to a small diner on the outskirts of the city to meet Aunt Patricia. She was my father's older sister, the only person in the family who had refused to drink the Kool-Aid. She had been estranged from Robert for years, ever since she called him a pompous fool at a Christmas party in 2018. She was waiting for me in a booth, a cup of black coffee in front of her, and a cardboard banker's box on the seat beside her. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You look terrible," she said. It was a compliment coming from her. It meant I looked real. I left, I said. I cut them off. Good, she nodded. It took you long enough, dying probably. He called me to fix the valves. Of course he did. He thinks he owns your hands. She pushed the cardboard box toward me. It smelled like dust and old paper. I saved this from your grandmother's house when she passed. Robert wanted to throw it all in a skip, said it was just clutter, but I knew he didn't read any of it. I did. What is it? Evidence, she said grimly. But before you look at that, are you okay? The question caught me off guard. My throat tightened. I looked out the window at the grey Portland sky. Was I okay? No, I felt like I had amputated a limb. It was a gangrenous limb poisoning my blood, but it was still a part of me. I feel guilty, I admitted, my voice cracking. I feel like I'm killing them. You aren't killing them, Emily. You're just burying the hope that they'll ever change. That was it. The truth pierced me like a needle. I wasn't crying for the loss of Robert and Susan. I knew exactly who they were. Selfish, small people who viewed their children as assets. I was crying for the parents I had invented in my head to survive, the father who was proud of my designs, the mother who protected me. I was holding a funeral for a fantasy. I had to grieve the living as if they were dead because the people I needed them to be had never existed at all. I wiped my face with a paper napkin. I'm done hopping, I said. Patricia patted the box. Good, because what's in here will make sure you never hope again. Open it. I opened the banker's box. It was filled with the mundane detritus of a life: receipts, tax returns from the nines, old greeting cards. But near the bottom, tucked inside a heavy cream-coloured envelope, was a file folder labelled in my grandmother's spidery handwriting for Emily to Bloom. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled it out. The folder was heavy. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a copy of a trust document. My grandmother had established a fund before she died, specifically designated for Emily's future botanical enterprise. She had seen my sketches. She had known my dream long before I had the courage to speak it aloud. I turned the page to the account statement. The balance as of 5 years ago was $150,000. $150,000, the room spun. That money would have changed everything. It would have paid off my student loans. It would have bought the land I was currently saving pennies for. It was freedom sitting in an account with my name on it. But then I saw the next page, a transaction record. The entire balance had been liquidated on February 14, 2019. A single wire transfer. My hands were shaking as I picked up the photocopy of the withdrawal slip. At the bottom on the signature line was my name, Emily, but it wasn't my signature. The loops on the E were too wide, the E too flourished. It looked like someone trying to copy my hand but unable to suppress their own vanity. It looked exactly like my mother's handwriting. I stared at the date again. February 2019. The memories clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. That was the month. Ashley moved to Los Angeles to pursue lifestyle modeling. She had rented a penthouse in West Hollywood for 6 months. She had hired a personal brand consultant. She had leased a convertible. My parents had told me she won a talent grant. They hadn't just favored her. They had robbed me to fund her delusions. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing the last of my guilt. This wasn't just bad parenting. This wasn't just a toxic dynamic. This was grand larceny. This was a felony. They had looked at my Future my grandmother's gift to me, and decided it was better spent on Ashley's Instagram aesthetic. I placed the paper down on the table next to my coffee. The trembling in my hands stopped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a steely forensic calm. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a victim of fraud, and I was holding the smoking gun. I took out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of the forged slip. Then I called the police non-emergency line. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply stated the facts. I would like to report a theft. I have the documents. They wanted a war. They wanted to call me selfish for leaving. Fine. I would show them what selfish looked like. I would show them the cost of stealing a life. A week later, the harvest came. I was in the middle of a design review with the senior partners at the architectural firm. We were standing around a drafting table discussing the load-bearing requirements for a rooftop garden on a skyscraper when the receptionist buzzed in. "Emily," she said, her voice tight, with professional strain. "There are some people here to see you. They say they're your parents. I told them you were in a meeting, but they're insisting." I felt the blood drain from my face, then rushed back hot and fast. "I'll handle it," I said to the partners. "My apologies. Give me 5 minutes." I walked into the lobby. It was a sleek minimalist space of glass and polished concrete, silent except for the low hum of the HVAC. And there they were, Robert and Susan, standing by the reception desk. Like a stain on a white shirt, they looked disheveled. Robert's shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven. Susan was wearing a coat that looked too heavy for the season, clutching her purse with white-knuckled desperation. They had been evicted 3 days ago. I knew because the leasing office had emailed me a courtesy notification as the former guarantor. When Robert saw me, he straightened up, trying to summon the old authority. "Emily," he boomed, his voice echoing uncomfortably in the quiet space. "This has gone on long enough. You need to stop this tantrum right now. We have nowhere to go." The receptionist reached for the phone, looking at me for a cue to call security. I held up a hand. "Not yet. You're causing a scene," I said, my voice low and even. "Leave." "We are not leaving until you fix this," Susan cried out, tears already welling up. "We are your parents. How can you be so cruel? We're sleeping in a motel." "You have money," Robert snarled, stepping closer. "I know what you make. You're going to write us a check, and you're going to cosign a new lease. Today I am your father, and I demand you show some respect." He really believed it. He believed that his title, father, was a currency that never devalued regardless of his actions. It was fascinating in a horrific way. It was the illusion of the empty wallet. For years, they had worn their status like expensive clothing, strutting around as successful business owners, generous parents, pillars of the community. But that status was leased. It was rented with my money, my labor, my silence. Now that the funding had stopped, the costume had fallen away, revealing the empty people underneath. They hadn't built anything. They were nothing without someone else to consume. "Respect?" I asked. The word tasted like ash. "Is that what you call grand larceny?" Robert froze. "What?" I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the high-resolution photocopy of the withdrawal slip from the trust fund. I held it up. "February 14th, 2019. I said $150,000. Wire transfer to an account in Los Angeles." Susan made a sound like a wounded animal. Robert's face went from red to a terrifying shade of grey. "I didn't sign this," I said, tapping the forgery. "You did, Susan. And you spent it on Ashley's brand consultant and a penthouse she got evicted from in 6 months. "Emily, please," Susan whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "With what I asked, with the profits from the business I was running for free, with the rent money I was paying, I took a step forward, and for the first time in my life I saw them flinch. They were small. They were terrified. They were criminals who had just realized the judge was in the room. "I've already spoken to the police," I said. "The fraud unit is very interested in this document. It's a Class B felony, minimum mandatory sentencing." Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The bluster was gone. The entitlement was gone. There was only the cold, hard reality of consequences. "You have 24 hours, I said. "If you are still in this city by this time tomorrow, I file the charges. I will send you to prison." "You wouldn't," Robert rasped. "We're your family." "I don't have a family," I said. "I have a landscaping project that required extensive pruning." I turned to the receptionist. "You can call security now." I didn't watch them leave. I turned my back and walked toward the elevators. Behind me I heard the heavy glass doors slide open and shut. The silence returned to the lobby, clean and unbroken. 6 months later, the nursery was gone, sold for parts. The glass from the greenhouse I once loved was auctioned off to a cannabis grower in Washington. The land was sold to a developer to pay the IRS, the creditors, and the legal fees. Robert and Susan avoided prison only because I agreed to a plea deal. They plead guilty to fraud, paid partial restitution from the sale of the land, and accepted a permanent restraining order. I heard through Aunt Patricia that Robert got a job as a night security guard at a warehouse. He wears a uniform and checks IDs for $28 an hour. Susan sells vegetables at a farmer's market on weekends for a local co-op. Ashley is working as a barista in Seattle, sharing a studio apartment with 3 other people. They are learning for the first time in their lives the dignity of labor. They are learning that food doesn't appear on the table by magic. It appears by sweat. I didn't take the restitution money to buy a car or a vacation. I used it along with my own savings to buy 5 acres of raw land in the Willamette Valley. It's overgrown, wild and messy. It needs clearing, it needs gradding, it needs work, and it's mine. I stood in the center of the field yesterday, the spring rain soft on my face. I knelt down and dug my hands into the earth. It was cold and wet and real. I planted the first seed, a native oak, slow-growing, strong, deep-rooted. Robert was right about one thing. I was born to tend the soil, but he was wrong about the purpose. I wasn't born to help Ashley bloom. I wasn't born to be the fertilizer for someone else's garden. I was born to be the gardener of my own life. I patted the soil down over the seed. I didn't look back at the past. I looked forward at the empty field waiting to be filled. It was going to be hard work. It was going to take years, and I couldn't wait to get started. If you've ever had to prune your own family tree to save your life, share this story. You are not alone. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story. Share this story. You are not alone. God bless you. Thanks for watching.